What is going on, everybody? It has been quite a while. So I've been working on a ton of different things. I've got a bunch of new blog content out. I've started a newsletter. I'm just kind of redoing a lot of the ways that I'm doing kind of content creation. And what that's going to end up looking like is basically these videos are going to be a lot faster and a little bit more like code reviewy. So basically, I'm going to just kind of show you exactly what I'm doing and how I'm doing it and how my research has kind of progressed. It's going to be a little bit quicker and a little bit more to the point, but hopefully that, it'll be something that y'all will like a little bit more. So this is going to be all about creating a malware C2 using Python, specifically the Python Flask library. Now, I've been doing Python and Python Flask specifically a lot over the last several years, mainly to create APIs. And one of the things that I kind of thought about was an API or a malware C2 is really just an API for malware. I mean, really, that's all it is. If you're doing it over the web, obviously there are different ways that you can set up your command and control servers to kind of communicate differently. But obviously, I'm using Python Flask, which means that it's going to operate over HTTP, HTTPS. So I'm not going to show any of the actual client-side code because I haven't developed it yet. I just developed the C2 that the malware is going to actually communicate with. So let's switch over. So we're over here in the code, and like I said, it's the Python Flask library. If you don't know anything about it, I've got a couple of videos on Python Flask that I'll pop up over in the corners or down in the description that you can kind of check out. Flask is a really awesome library that you can use to build anything from like simple dashboards to full-fledged like enterprise level APIs. I've used it for both. The dashboards aren't pretty. It's not a really great way to develop a front-end framework, but it is a way that you can do it. And I've got a couple of videos and some content on that as well that I'll link everywhere. But basically, obviously, we're doing a malware C2. This time, it's not going to be a normal web API. So we're going to be using Flask, and eventually, or essentially what this is doing right here is we're creating the actual Flask app itself. This middleware up here, not super important unless you're really into Flask development. Essentially, it's just setting up the logging for this app. But like I said, not super important. Basically, we're initializing everything, making sure that all of our paths are where they are supposed to be, just to kind of make sure that I've got my C2 set up correctly. And we start with our routes. Now, a quick crash course on APIs, basically the way they work is setting up routes. And all routes are specific web pages that you hit in specific ways in order to basically do certain things. So for like a web application, if I wanted to make like a post or something like that, there might be a create post route at /API/create post. And if I hit that API endpoint with a certain post request that has the post body and all of that fun stuff in it, then basically it will create the post for me. I just have to actually hit it in the right way. So these are all of the routes that we're creating right here with @app.route. And then the function directly underneath that is the function that's going to be called when that actual route is hit. So obviously we've got some debugging information here. This is obviously the debug version of this C2. And we're picking up the IP address, and right here is where we're going to be looking in our host directory. And basically what the host directory is it's going to be looking for a flat text file that corresponds to each host. Instead of using a database and all of that fun stuff, I'm just using JSON files. It makes life a lot easier for me. So we're actually reading in everything. We're pulling the last check-in kind of timer out of the request. So that's obviously, or we're putting it into the request, sorry. And then we're dumping that out to a file. So what this is going to do is it's going to return ping to the actual malware itself. Actually, you probably should fix this because status 200 and then message ping. Basically, I want all of these to return JSON because I want my malware to know what it's going to expect at the other end. So we'll do the exact same thing here. We want our malware to know that no matter what endpoint it hits, it's expecting JSON data. So I'm going to fix that up real quick. So that route, all it really does is checks to see if the C2 is alive. So it's basically sending a command to the C2 saying, hey, are you still up? If it is, then the C2 will send the ping back to the C2 or back to the malware itself. and it's going to dump the actual date timestamp into that host file right here. And that's going to basically give me a log of, okay, when was the last time this malware checked into the C2? So it's basically a way for the malware to make sure the C2 is alive and the C2 to make sure the malware is alive. So next is when things kind of get interesting. We start talking about actual commands. Now, the way a lot of APIs are laid out is you've got these directories and subdirectories. So this /command route right here is going to be where I put all of the API routes or all of the C2 routes that correspond to commands, either sending commands or receiving responses from commands, or anything like that. So this right here is going to be the get command. It's going to check and see in the host file right here corresponding to the IP address if there is any command that has been written out to that JSON blob. So it's reading in the content here, closing the file, and then parsing it as JSON. So it's going to check right here to see if there is a command object within here. And if there is, it's going to go ahead and return it to the malware. And what the malware is going to do, obviously, on its end, is it is going to run that command, and then it's going to send the response back here, I think? No, right here. I believe this right here is where it's going to actually send the response. I'm fairly certain it is. We'll get to that. So basically, the malware is going to actually run the command. It's going to get a response object, and it's going to send it back to the C2, and the C2 is going to log that in a certain way. So that's essentially what this right here is doing. It's checking to see if there is a command that it needs to send on to the malware. And that command is going to be within this host file. So this right here is, it's looking for the actual result. So when a result is being sent back to, or when a command is being sent to the malware, the command is going to correspond to a specific ID. And if we look up here, it may not be here. No, I'm creating the command ID somewhere else. But I'll show that here in a second. But essentially right here actually. So essentially all that's going to be is the MD5 hash of the command string plus a underscore plus the timestamp. So that's going to create a unique ID for every command that we're going to be able to use to actually basically create, unique identifiers for those commands. And obviously, that's going to be important right here because we're going to store all of these commands within this JSON file. So if we run the same command over and over and over again, we want to have a way to uniquely pull out. I don't want just the one time that I ran the ping command. I want the last time that I ran the ping command, and we're going to be able to use the command's ID in order to do that here. So actually I was highlighting the wrong one. That's the get result right here. So right here is where we're going to actually be pulling out that command. So this endpoint right here is going to be hit by the dashboard. That's going to be hit by the malware operator who is actually trying to look at the results of the command that they just ran. It's not going to be hit by the malware itself. So what you could technically do is create a separate API for the dashboard to hit and a separate API for the actual malware to hit. This is not ever going to actually get released as like a product or anything, so there's no point in me kind of professionalizing it like that. I did it this way because it's the simplest possible way to do it. So that's going to get your result right there from your host file. This right here is going to actually create the command. So this is going to be another API endpoint that is going to be hit by the dashboard or by the malware operator. They could also hit the API without using the dashboard. The dashboard is just going to be the front end's user interface. But this right here is going to be the route that is actually hit in order to create a command. So it's going to write the command out to this JSON file, and that command is going to be what's pulled up here when the malware makes a request. So right there is going to be where it's actually pulled from that JSON file. But right here is where we create the command. We're getting the commands from the CMD field within our JSON object. We're opening our host file, we're reading it in, we are loading it in as a JSON object. We're creating this ID right here. So like I said, you're taking the MD5 hash of the actual command that's going to be run, and we are concatenating that with an underscore and then the timestamp right here. So then we're writing that command out to the actual JSON file, basically as a a mapping of the ID to command. So that way we're actually going to be able to, look it up a little bit easier. We're writing it out and then we're closing it. So then we're going to actually send all of that information back with the ID so that when, the front end actually has to echo that stuff out, then eventually I'll be able to click on the ID and that's going to show me the results if there are any results, things like that. This is all going to build on itself and make a lot more sense once there's a front end and the malware is actually interacting with it. So then we're going to create the response. So this is going to be when the malware actually runs the command and then sends the response. This is going to be the API endpoint that it hits. It's going to hit it based on its IP address and the ID of the command that it ran. So it's going to receive the ID of the command from within the JSON file up here. So this object right here, this command object right here is actually that mapping between the ID and the command value itself. So where was I? So it's going to actually create the response, and this is where it actually loads it all in. I'm not going to go through every single line like I was before. It's basically just manipulating JSON or dictionary objects. And that's really it. So about 11.5 minutes, it wasn't too bad, kind of to explain how all of this stuff works. Basically, the whole idea of it is we're taking what we know about building normal web application APIs, and we're applying it to something a little bit different. We're applying it to malware C2s. And I think you can kind of see in this project that it's fairly clear that those two things aren't completely different at all. They're really the same thing. It's a difference in application. And the application here is we're building a malware C2, which is awesome. I think it's kind of cool that you can kind of use these technologies for good or for bad, or for good bad or for bad good. I kind of think of it as I'm building a malware C2 that is super duper simple, and it's not likely to actually be used in any meaningful way, but it teaches you how malware C2s work or how they can work, and it kind of gives you an idea of how the attackers can actually use these technologies. Instead of just building web applications, they can build malware C2s with the exact same technology. I hope you liked it. This is kind of a different like style of content. I'm pretty much just like recording this stuff, throwing it in, and like throwing it up on my channel like very super fast. I kind of feel like that might be good. Instead of like not posting anything, I'm going to post things that are, kind of lower effort, but still like helpful and educational. So if you liked it, let me know. If you didn't, also let me know. Take it easy. Peace.